Imperialism is a scourge of the earth. It is something which has been around almost as long as humanity itself, and it's something which continues to wreak havoc on the world today. When we are taught history in school, we are often taught a trivialized, saturated version of history, which glosses over many of the crimes of these empires. And speaking particularly as a British person, I can say with full confidence that I was not taught the full detail of the British Empire while I was in school. I was not taught about many of the atrocities committed about the British Empire. I didn't get to study these things until I went to university and studied history. And only then did I realize, wow, the British Empire was not very nice. It did a lot of bad things to the world. And speaking as a Welsh person within Britain, even my country has been subjected to 1,000 years of British oppression, and I wasn't even aware of it. I would go on school trips to Conwy Castle or Carnarvon Castle, and we would all be taught about these castles and how amazing they are and how they're big structures and bricks. And here's the thing, they were made by Edward I, a man who sought to oppress the Welsh, and that's why these buildings exist. So yes, even as a British person, I too have been a victim of the British Empire. Crazy, right? So we're going to look at 10 of the worst crimes committed by the British Empire. Now, these are not in any particular order. They might end up in some kind of order in terms of bad and in terms of terrible, and but we're going to dive into 10 of the worst crimes committed by the British Empire so that we can further see just how bad this empire was. Now, I know it did a lot of good things too, and there are plenty of videos out there which talk about them. So if you want to find a video which is very happy and friendly towards the British Empire, you can find many out there, but this one is not that video. So if you are going to be offended by any of these accusations against the British Empire, then I would suggest this is not the video for you. But I would also suggest this is the video for you because you need to hear about what this empire did. So without further ado, here are 10 of the worst crimes committed by the British Empire. Number 10. Rhodesia's Unilateral Declaration of Independence, 1965. So Rhodesia's Unilateral Declaration of Independence, or UDI, in 1965 marked a significant chapter in the history of Southern Africa. For those who don't know, Rhodesia is modern-day Zimbabwe. The move, orchestrated by the white minority government led by Prime Minister Ian Smith, severed ties with the British Crown and set the stage for a protracted struggle for independence. So, just a little background. Rhodesia, located in Southern Africa, now Zimbabwe, was a British colony since the late 19th century. The British South Africa Company, led by Cecil Rhodes, played a crucial role in the region's colonization, and by the mid-20th century, tensions emerged between the white minority ruling class and the indigenous black population over issues such as land ownership and political representation. So as the winds of change swept through Africa, and they did during this time, pushing for decolonization, British government sought to address racial imbalances in its colony. However, the white minority government in Rhodesia, fearing loss of power and privileges, resisted these efforts. Negotiations between the British and Rhodesia reached an impasse over the issue of majority rule, leading to heightened tensions. And on the 11th of November 1965, Prime Minister Ian Smith and his government unilaterally declared independence from Britain. The UDI was a direct response to the failure of negotiations and a rejection of British efforts to impose a timetable for majority rule. Smith's government sought to maintain a white minority rule and resisted international pressure to accept majority rule. Britain then responded with Harold Wilson, the Prime Minister at the time, condemning Rhodesia's UDI as illegal and a breach of constitutional principles. The United Nations also denounced the move, imposing economic sanctions on Rhodesia to force it back into the fold. Britain engaged in diplomatic efforts to isolate Rhodesia, seeking support from the international community to undermine its economy and to pressure the white minority regime. So, with all that said, why is this one of the 10 worst things the British Empire did? Well, quite simply, it allowed it to happen. It didn't try hard enough to prevent Smith and his white minority government from taking over Rhodesia, and this created a lot of problems. So, this led to a protracted conflict in Rhodesia and marked a beginning of guerrilla warfare and international isolation for the country. The Bush War ensued, lasting until 1979, when negotiations at Lancaster House in London resulted in a settlement that paved the way for Zimbabwe's independence. And in 1980, Zimbabwe emerged as an independent nation with majority rule under the leadership of Robert Mugabe. We all know who Robert Mugabe is, and yes, this failure by Britain allowed a white minority leadership to take over, which then eventually led to Robert Mugabe, who is in some ways worse than the white minority leadership. So Britain didn't try hard enough to protect Zimbabwe and give it the proper independence it deserved, and this is why this is number 10 on this list. Number 9. Culture Cultural looting. It has become a meme in recent times to joke about how so many items from around the world, historical items, are all to be found in one place, the British Museum. And this is, without a doubt, one of the worst things the British Empire has done. The issue of cultural artifacts acquired through colonization, often described as looting, has been a subject of significant debate and controversy. British colonial history has no exception, with numerous instances of the acquisition of cultural and historical items from various regions under British rule. The retention of these items in museums and private collections has led to ongoing discussions about repatriation and the ethics of holding such cultural heritage. Such historical, worldly items as the Benin bronzes, which came into British possession during the late 19th century. Another example is the Elgin marbles, which are a collection of classical Greek marble sculptures that once adorned the Parthenon and other buildings on the Acropolis of Athens. And again, in the early 19th century, these came into the hands of the British Empire. Then we have the Magdala treasures, which in 1868 British forces ransacked the fortress of Emperor Tewadros II in Magdala, now known as Ethiopia. There is the Koh-i-Noor diamond, now a part of the British Crown Jewels, which has a complex history of ownership and has been the subject of much debate because it was originally mined in India. It is not British. So this has been a large, wide-scale problem, and it's one which comes under great scrutiny today as people are now calling for these artifacts to be returned to their rightful countries. We see it with the Rosetta Stone, for example, as a recent example of something in the British Museum which Egypt is now wanting to claim back. These items should be returned to their rightful countries, and this is a much discussed about topic today, and it's one of the 10 worst things the British Empire has done. Number 8, the Bengal Famine of 1943. So, the Bengal Famine of 1943 stands as one of the darkest chapters in India's colonial history, characterized by widespread starvation and a tragic loss of life. So, during World War II, Bengal, a province in then British India, faced a severe food shortage exacerbated by a combination of factors. The war disrupted normal trade routes, leading to reduced rice imports. Additionally, the Japanese occupation of Burma, which is now Myanmar, further hindered the flow of rice into Bengal. Poor governance, market manipulations, and the forced rice procurement policies of the British colonial administration further deepened the crisis. So what did Britain do to exacerbate and further create this problem? This absolute disgusting problem. So the British administration, under the leadership of Governor Richard Casey, implemented policies that prioritized rice procurement for the war effort. The government compelled Bengal's farmers to sell rice to support British troops and war allies, leaving the local population vulnerable to famine. The extraction of rice for the war effort significantly contributed to the scarcity of food. Then there was the hoarding and black market operations by traders seeking to profit from the crisis, worsened by the food shortage. The colonial administration failed to regulate these practices effectively and allowed unscrupulous traders to manipulate prices and exacerbate the famine conditions. Then, despite being aware of the escalating humanitarian crisis, the British administration's response was inadequate. Relief efforts were hindered by bureaucratic inefficiencies, lack of understanding of the scale of the problem, and a reluctance to divert resources from the war. The failure to take timely and effective action resulted in countless deaths from starvation and related disease. Then, lastly, there are accounts of racial bias and indifferences among some of the British officials who viewed the Bengali population with a lack of empathy. The perception of the Indian population as expendable in the context of the war effort further hindered the implementation of effective relief measures. So, as you can probably get from this, the British allowed this to happen. They failed to act on it because of an indifference, and with a racist view, they didn't care, and that's what caused the Bengali famine of 1943. And if I was to make this in an order of the 10 worst, this is probably my number 1. Due to the sheer length of this video, we have decided to split it into 3 parts. This will serve as part 1. Part 2 will be out Wednesday, and part 3 will be out Friday. If you like this video and other content we give, you better do, or else we'll whoop you, then please hit the subscribe button. You can follow us on facebook.com/The Collective Histories page, and you can follow us on Instagram at instagram.com/The Collective Histories, and we're on X at x.com/Collective Histo. Anyway, we'll see you on Wednesday. Okay, goodbye!